my opponent in this race has said very clearly that he thinks American exceptionalism is insulting to the rest of the world.
She didn't go to Louisiana. She didn't go to Mexico. She was invited. She doesn't have the strength or the stamina to make America great again, believe me.
All right, Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, barring something completely unforeseen, one of them is going to be president of the United States.
You know, we'll know on November the 8th. We're back with Carlyle Group's David Rubenstein. This is obviously a contentious election, but I really want to talk to you, David, about the contention in Washington. There seems to be policies as opposed to left or right. There seems to be policies that are right or wrong, and yet there's a fever in Washington of contention. Is it worse than you've ever seen? And if it isn't, what do you think of it? And how are we going to improve it to get people to work better together in Washington?
It's always tempting to say when you see a problem, it's worse than it's ever been before because it gets more people's attention. But I think it is worse than it's ever been before because when I worked in Capitol Hill in the 70s, legislators wanted to work together. Democrats and Republicans, they socialized, they did things together, and it's very rare to see that now. I did start a program not long ago where I interview a great presidential historian about a matter of American history. So Doris Kearns Goodwin on Lincoln, for example. And then I invite members of Congress from both parties to come. And interestingly, when there's no press there, they get along, they talk. They're not talking about legislation, but they have social interaction, which they usually don't do. And I think we had more social interaction between the members would be good. But right now, many of the members don't really have social interaction.
People keep saying this over and over again. But why is that? I mean,
let me explain. In the old days, the old days, in the 40s or 50s or so, members of Congress actually lived there, but now many of them live in their districts, and they come Tuesday to Thursday. That's where the votes are. So for 4 days a week, they're really not there, and they really don't do as many congressional delegation travelings abroad as they did before because it's criticized, and they really spend a lot of their time raising money because the name of the game is having a lot of money to get an opponent not to run against you, or if you have an opponent, to compete against the opponent effectively. So they spend a lot of time raising money. They do their votes, but there isn't a lot of interchange between the two.
Can Clinton or Trump change that?
Hope springs eternal. And I hope that the next president, whoever he or she might be, would actually try to get members of Congress to talk together, work together. It used to be that if you were a good legislator, you actually were good at compromising. Now, if you compromise, you're considered to be really not very popular within your party. So many of them don't socialize with each other. They don't really talk to each other. It's hard to believe that this is going on. But right now, I think it's as bad as any time I've ever seen in Washington.
You mentioned Doris Kearns Goodwin. She also wrote a great book called The Bully Pulpit about the Taft and Roosevelt era, where there was a great income divide in the country at that time as well. What steps or measures do you think the American president can take to help close that income divide?
Well, income inequality has been increasing, and probably it's as bad as any time since late 1920s. Maybe it's even worse. I don't think you can solve that problem overnight. I do think part of the problem is that the people in the lower part of the economic scale are just going further and further down because they're not educated, they're not getting good jobs. The low minimum wage jobs are not really ones that are going to make you have a productive income for your family. So I think it's getting worse and worse. I think the Great Recession exacerbated the problem, and although we've come back from the Great Recession, the people in the lower part of the economic scale have not come back, and they are doing worse than probably they've ever done.
You think about the Fed's role in all this as well, Anthony, right? I mean, David, they have left interest rates at record lows for the longest time that we've had on record. And perhaps inadvertently helped create some of that income inequality in that the stock market's doing well. If you got capital to invest, you're going to see some returns from that. But anybody else is really challenged.
Yes, interest rates have been kept very low, and I think the Fed would like to change that. They've telegraphed many times they would like to increase it, but they haven't quite found the time to do it. I suspect the markets feel that they will do it for sure this year. My own view is probably in December rather than September, but who really knows? Yeah. I think even in December, though, it would be a modest increase. I think it's going to take a while before the Fed feels it's comfortable going back to where we were, 5 or 10 years ago. But the low interest rates we've had have probably exacerbated asset prices and fueled wealth creation for the people at the top, but probably not the people at the bottom.
Sort of a question I ask most of our guests. Do you think Wall Street or the financial markets, the presidency or who gets elected president really matter to the markets?
Well, I think the markets, by indicating people on Wall Street give a lot of money to campaigns, so they must care about it. But I think in the end, business people will take whatever the circumstances are and try to work with it. So whoever's president, Wall Street's not going to go home and just not do anything. They're going to try to react and try to make money. I think some candidates are thought to be better than others. But actually, when you look back on it, while you might say business is more favorable to Republicans, the stock market has actually done much better when you have an all-Democratic Congress and a Democratic president, historically. There's been higher GDP growth and higher stock market. So it's not clear that the Republicans necessarily are better for the economy or better for Wall Street.
In the 1930s, Franklin Roosevelt said that he accepted the bankers' scorn and he relished it. And for about 20 years, bankers in Wall Street had a very negative opinion. It wasn't until the 50s that it improved. We're back there again after the crisis. Bankers, private equity people, hedge fund people like myself are social pariahs, David.
Yes.
When do you think that will end?
Well, in the era of political correctness, there are very few people you can criticize anymore and not be criticized yourself. So those people you can criticize are members of Congress, hedge fund people, bankers, and private equity people. Everybody else is off limits. There's no doubt that people today feel that bankers...
The media too, David. That's that's part of the holy trinity of hatred.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I happen to be all three, so I don't know.
There's no doubt that bankers are pretty unpopular right now, and private equity people and hedge fund people are not going to win any popularity contests. But I do think we should remind people that these are people who are doing productive things for society, and they are helping create jobs. We're not people who are just parasites on society, as unfortunately some people think. I think some people in Washington have the view that bankers or people in private equity or hedge funds are not doing anything productive, and I think that's not fair.
Well, you know, part of that's because of the tax code, right? I mean, back to some kind of tax reform that needs to happen, as you stated earlier in the program. What does that mean for people like yourself?
Well, I'm worried less about myself than what the economy would do. Right now, I think that people in my situation are actually doing pretty well. So whether taxes go up for me or not, it's not my main concern. My main concern as an American is to try to make sure the economy is doing well and the country is strong. So I do think we should have tax reform, and everything should be considered as part of that. Everything should be on the table, and we should have a serious look at how to improve the tax code. Right now, very few people understand it, and very few people can fill out their own tax reforms or tax code.
All right, we're going to be back with more from David Rubenstein when Wall Street Week returns. Stay with us.